Hello again, and happy Friday. Dan Alasso here with Making History, and I've got some more thoughts about history and religion. Yesterday, while I was walking a couple of miles to the cat cafe where I wanted to do some of my work, I was listening to Megyn Kelly talking to Victor Davis Hanson. And there was a moment when she sort of went off on what's happening on college campuses today, including the idea that what she called the woke mind virus had replaced religion and had begun to function as some sort of faith without a God. I think it's an interesting claim, and to whatever extent it's true, probably an unfortunate development. In the course of that, Megyn talked a bit about the French Revolution and other moments of extreme social upheaval in that context, describing how the Jacobins had secularized French society and had even gone so far as to changing the names of basic things in life, like the months of the year. And this was probably a bit surprising to listeners who don't know anything about the story of the French Revolution. It does seem a bit over the top, maybe even irrational when you think about it, to try to replace Catholicism with a secular religion. And people might take it as evidence that the revolution was wrong, or maybe even evil. The Reign of Terror certainly was. And that seems to be what Megyn is implying. But let's look at the French Revolution. It was a revolt of regular people against a very rigid, absolute monarchy that, in the rare moments that it had any representation at all, would pit the people, who were called the Third Estate and made up about 98% of the population, against the clergy, the First Estate, and the nobility, the Second Estate. Although very often the French legislature, or the Estates General, that was composed of these three groups, was not even allowed to convene by the absolute monarch. In 1789, King Louis XV found himself short of funds after supporting the English rebels in what, because we won, became known as the American Revolution. He was forced to convene the estates, but he was relatively secure in the belief that the First and Second Estates could always be counted on to overrule the Third, as they had historically done. The Third Estate, however, argued for voting by head rather than by social status, since they hugely outnumbered the elites. And when the king refused, the people repudiated the Estates General and declared themselves the National Assembly. 2 days later, the clergy decided to throw their power behind the people, and the revolution was underway. My point is that the Catholic Church in France was an incredibly powerful player in national politics. For centuries, the Church had been a loyal, dependable ally of the crown. Its decision to support the people that brought about the revolution changed the balance of power very visibly. The Jacobins were obsessively focused on political power. So it should come as no surprise that the status of this church in French society would need to be addressed as soon as they consolidated their control. And so what I gather from all of this is that Megyn seems to have a sort of ahistorical view of the history of the church and its relationships with the societies in which it existed. I don't think that perspective is unique. So I suppose I'm going to have to do a bit of reading about the ways that Catholics and Protestants and Muslims and other denominations understand their own histories internally. Ironically, there is some truth to the genealogy that she kind of implies, that the postmodernism that would ultimately spawn a lot of the woke thinking that she objects to probably does have its roots in the same Enlightenment ideas that contributed to the revolutions, both the French and the American. But I think she's missing what to me is an important point. The ideas of individual rights and a social contract that motivated these revolutions did challenge long-held beliefs about social hierarchy that were broadly accepted, if not actively promoted and even developed, by organized religion, both for its own use and as an ally of monarchs. These rebellious ideas of individual liberty and limited government led not only to the Jacobins, but also to Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. So it's complicated. Actually, I find the complications really interesting, and I think it's important to understand the interactions between these competing ideologies, which some people do call mind viruses, especially when they dislike them, and how they changed over time. That doesn't mean that wokeism hasn't replaced religion on college campuses. In fact, to the extent that the woke agenda has just kind of slotted itself into the place once occupied by organized religion, or worse yet, has deliberately grabbed tools and techniques from religion's bag of tricks, then I would consider that kind of a big problem. But a problem precisely because it behaves like a religion, not because it replaces one. On the whole, however, my reaction, I think, tends to be the same as my response to Brett Weinstein yesterday. Judge them by their acts. And as a historian, I guess it falls to me to remind people of their acts. So I will be doing that. But I will also be trying to understand the way that insiders to a religious tradition like Megyn view their history and what they believe their acts to have been, because there might be a little bit of a difference. So as I begin that, I hope people will find it interesting and useful, and I hope you found this a little bit interesting. Thank you for watching. I will see you again very soon.